Okay, let's go ahead and jump in and welcome everybody to our March Strong Start Network meeting. It is really nice to see you all virtually here. Thank you for making time at the end of a very long and busy day, I know, for everybody, but excited to jump into our session today. So today's session, I think I previewed this to most of you at our group reflection calls, but we will be following up on the work that we were doing in January and February around text-dependent questions. And we were focused there around how we're using text-dependent questions to give students access to the text. And I think a topic and question that was coming up a lot was, and what do I do when students are struggling to answer these questions? How do I make sure to give students access and support all students in reaching our expectations there? And so today's session is really building on that by focusing on how do we provide scaffolding for student thinking during the lesson. And so excited to jump into that topic with you all. We're going to get started with a quick do now. So what I want you to do is just reflect on your own practice currently. We're going to deep dive into how we support students with scaffolding around text-dependent questions. So I want you to think about what strategies do you already use to provide scaffolding to students for text-based discussion and writing, and what challenges do you experience with scaffolding? We'll give us 3 minutes to answer. You can just put your answer into the chat box. Okay, so I see sentence stems, additional questions being called out a lot. Debbie named Amplify giving a lot of resources there. Lincoln Heights, I like how you called out teacher think alouds as a strategy. Okay, great. I see previewing text, a lot of thinking about how our questions themselves are a scaffold, which is great. Okay, well, I think there's a lot in there that you guys are already identifying as excellent scaffolding strategies, and we will definitely touch upon some of those today and hopefully help you refine your practice and think about how you take some of those strategies to the next level for your students. So excited to dig in more there. And Bethany, you want to do introductions here?
That's fine. Just encourage you to keep adding to the chat for sure, both what you're doing and then the challenges you're facing. And I see lots of folks saying, you know, I agree, so-and-so, or right on, so-and-so. So it looks like we're experiencing some similar things there in the classroom. I just want to welcome you back. Jetta and I so enjoyed spending some kind of small group time with you for our February reflection calls. But we just want to say we're excited to be back with you for a deeper learning session today. Also with us, next slide there, Jetta.
Sorry.
No worries. Of course, we had the rest of the Rural Life team, Dr. Kitzmiller, John Payne, Brittany Siebert, of course, who you've been hearing from in terms of our communications director, and John's the man behind the magic here on Zoom. So we appreciate all he does for us. Also appreciate our coaches. You know, they help us facilitate some small group discussions, which we'll have today as a part of our session. So I'll let them wave at you from their Zoom square. All right, next. Of course, there's you, right? We're so glad to have you here, and it's always fun to shout out our teams. And so we look forward to getting to know you a little bit more each and every session together. And so please, we want you to share in the chat, get off the, turn on your mic, share your voices and experiences with us as we go throughout today's session. All right, session overview real quickly, a few reminders. Don't forget the website is our hub of operations. So all things Strong Start Network will be included there. That includes meeting information on the calendar, resources. I've dropped a link in the chat for that a little bit earlier, but everything we need is on the Strong Start Network website. So excited to share my little tease about our Strong Start Network glamour shots. We have our glamour shots up and on our member directory on the website, so check that out. Love seeing it. And a couple of you, I think maybe there were about 7 or 8 of us, still would love to have a picture, so send that glamour shot our way and we will add you to the mix. But just it's exciting to see all of our faces kind of in one space, and to see kind of where you're located and if you're a teacher or a leader. So thank you to Brittany, who pulled that really cool graphic together of all of us as members of the Strong Start Network. Also, just want to shout out a reminder about that student work sample routine. So excited to kind of keep in those student work sample folders and see those kind of populating in. We'll revisit that routine, like Jetta said last time, especially on our reflection calls, where we really dig into how our practice impacts student learning. And there'll be more about how we'll use those work samples in future sessions. So I'll leave it at that for now. So next we have network learning and collaboration. Of course, Jetta will lead us through that. And by the end of the session, we'll be wrapping up, talking about next steps and reminder about upcoming dates. Another shout out, I really, really appreciated the reflections on the reflection calls. Those were our network mindsets in action. We know that, continuous improvement is as much a frame of mind as it is a set of actions. So Jetta, if you'll populate our little list of mindsets, on our reflection calls and really on our other deeper learning session calls, and much like I'm sure we'll see today, love hearing you all speak about optimism, that our students can do the work that's put in front of them with that appropriate support from the teacher, having empathy and trying to understand our students and where they struggle and how we can best support. Loved hearing from you all some creative ways you were tackling supporting students and getting creative with the materials and getting an idea in your head and not just leaving it there, but making it real and finding ways to support without decreasing the rigor of the lesson. It was neat to hear you all talk about that, and we'll continue to discuss that today. Same thing, learning from failure. You all were so open and transparent about, oh man, I tried that and it didn't work. And really being open to hearing what others had tried and saying, oh, I want to try that. We know this work can be very ambiguous at times, especially with new materials. You've not done it before, so you're kind of taking a leap of faith each lesson almost. So it was neat to hear you all reflect on that. And we know that we're constantly, trying something, tweaking it and trying it again. And just, again, another shout out to hearing you all put those mindsets in action in your classrooms and schools. All right, Jetta, I think next it's back to you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so here are our learning objectives for today's session. So we will reflect on how to utilize scaffolding strategies to maintain the rigor rather than water down my instructional materials. We will explore some concrete instructional strategies that can provide students access to rich and challenging texts and tasks. And then we will create a plan for an upcoming lesson to incorporate scaffolding strategies where students might struggle. So, we will take sort of a big picture look at scaffolding and how to utilize it to give our students access. We'll look at some very concrete strategies, and then we'll really zoom in on your own classroom and make sure you leave here with some concrete next steps that you want to implement, and you've gotten some support from your colleagues to think about. This is a visual we looked at in our February reflection call, but I wanted to ground today's session in it as well. We talked about how, the work you are doing day to day can feel like, oh, I'm implementing new materials this year, and that's a big part of my day-to-day shift in my instruction. But you're all also undergoing a huge shift in practice and how you approach literacy instruction in your classroom, and your strong instructional materials are a big piece of that. Today's session, when we think about scaffolding, we'll look at how your materials support you in providing scaffolding to students, but we're also taking this bigger picture view of what do we want our student experience in our literacy classrooms to look like, and how should scaffolding be a part of that? Here's our agenda for how we'll get through some of that content. So we'll do a quick team builder here. We're going to talk about our vision for scaffolding in literacy. We'll look at some specific strategies. Then we're going to look at a specific example from our materials. Then you'll have time for some planning in your own classroom and homework and next steps. Okay, so we're going to start with a quick team builder. We're going to do this team builder over a poll. So I'm going to give you some questions. I'll go over them, and then you're going to get a poll to fill out to share out your responses, so we can learn a little bit more about our whole group across the Strong Start network. So you're going to have to choose between these items, so this or that. So you'll pick which item you like more or feel more passionate about. So the first one is Facebook or Twitter. The next one is read the book or watch the movie. The next one is phone call or text message. And then play sports or watch sports, fiction or nonfiction. So for each of those items, pick which one you like more. And we'll see what our poll results are as a big Strong Start network.
Oh, somebody give me a thumbs up. Do you see a poll? Yay! I love it when stuff works. All righty, let's see if I can. Oh, y'all see the poll results?
I can see them. Can everyone see them?
Linda's shaking her head. Awesome. So, wow, look at that, Jetta. I can scroll down here.
Wow, a big Facebook contingency. I feel like if middle schoolers took this, there would be very different results here. It would be like only TikTok or something, English teachers, so I'm not surprised to see read the book. That's popular. Oh, a lot more texters here. Some play sports, I'm surprised. That's good.
We did have a big hiking group. Remember, there were lots of hikers in this group. We learned from our reflection calls.
Great. And a lot of fiction readers. That's also not surprising from all of our English teachers here, Okay, thank you guys. We will get to continue to know more about ourselves as a group, but appreciate you guys doing that. Okay, let's do for your homework from our reflection, our last call, our reflection call together. We asked you guys to implement your text-dependent question lesson and collect some data on that and do some reflection on implementation. So we're going to start with another quick poll here to see some results of our implementation across our network. So I want you to reflect on that lesson and the data you collected here, and just answer how many text-dependent questions did you ask students in this lesson? And what percentage of students were able to accurately answer your text-dependent questions in general? And we will answer that poll and see what our results are.
All right, Jetta, can you see the results?
I can. Okay, this is exciting. I feel like this should be a huge celebration to see all the success here. One, just, the frequency of text-dependent questions we're seeing in classrooms across our networks. That's really exciting. We have about 73% of folks asking 6 to 10 text-dependent questions in the lesson. So that is excellent. And then when we look at how our students are doing, I think this is a mix and probably sets up a real urgency around our topic for today's session, right? So how do we increase the accuracy of student responses to our text-dependent questions, and how can we use scaffolding to do that? And I hope that for you, that was a valuable reflection. I think sometimes we can speed through a lesson and not really pause to notice, like, how many kids did really answer that question correctly. So I hope that was a valuable reflection for you. We're going to go now into breakout rooms to do a little bit more discussion and reflection on the text-dependent question lesson you implemented. And we sent you with homework last time to reflect on a few specific questions. And so in your breakout rooms now, you're going to discuss some of that. For teachers, we asked you to reflect on what were your reflections on your implementation of TDQs, how did they impact student learning, and what did you notice about the impact on student writing? So teachers, you'll reflect on those questions. For leaders, we asked you to identify what trends did you notice about teachers' implementation, how did they impact student learning, and what did you notice about student writing? So we're going to do some teacher breakout rooms and some leader breakout rooms. And you guys will have 10 minutes, so that should be enough for all of everybody in your group to share out a bit, and then we will come back together. Everyone, just share my screen here. So I would love to hear from a few people, some reflections that you talked about in your groups. And I might actually call on someone from my group. I didn't warn them, but Leanne, I'm wondering if you would share just your reflection that you shared about observing the connection between text-dependent conversation and student writing.
Well, what I observed is that as teachers used text-dependent questions and they were focused in on those text-dependent questions and pushing students back into the text to answer those, that the student writing was better. It was more specific. They tended to reference the text more in their writing than if a teacher just used basic questions and did not reference the students back to the text. If a teacher asked questions that were not text dependent, or maybe asked a question that could have been text dependent but did not push the student back to the text to answer the question and simply accepted an answer from the student based on conversation or what they had heard the teacher say. That student's writing was very general, and they wrote about what they had heard repeated in the class, in the discussion, and the writing was not as good.
Would anyone else like to share some reflections you had in your group, or you can share out something you heard from a colleague?
Oh, you know it was coming, Carol. Where's Carol? We had a great discussion with the instructional coach group.
Yeah, I had a great experience. The teacher, and it was all about the planning. I'm telling you, it was planned very, very well. And I can't say enough. And and we talked about maybe, parents and teachers up, and just talking about how do you plan for these questions, and how do you plan for text dependent questions. But she knocked it out of the ballpark.
Great. I see some cheerleading going on in the chat too. Great. It's really nice to hear some of those big successes that you all are seeing in classrooms in terms of text dependent questions. But I, called on Leanne to share too, because I think it highlights the way that having these strong questions around the text in our discussion, really there's a direct line to then what we will see in student writing, right? And seeing those conversations and the questions we're asking themselves as preparation for writing, I think is really important. So then being able to really see the difference in what you're seeing in your student work, I think can be really rewarding and motivating. So I encourage you guys to continue to look there.
Jetta, I'll add on to what Carol said. She also shared an experience where this teacher inserted like a little quick write. So before everyone answered, everyone got their pencil to paper and really hashed out their thoughts on a little Post-it note, maybe 30 to 45 seconds, but how much impact that little moment, that little shift that really pushed back into the text impacted them, the student's ability to do the in-lesson task or whatnot. So that's, again, highlighting that importance of those questions, and then just that chance to get my thoughts together, independently, and that student ownership level increased.
I hope you guys can see my face lighting up so much. I love a quick write. I love a quick write. That's like such a strong, powerful strategy to implement. Just that very quick, in under a minute, giving everybody a chance to think and process before the discussion is really powerful. So great.
I have to brag about the conversation that Rachel Shanks and I had, because even to add to the discussion that you all are having, going beyond that too, there are kids that quick write can be even another layer, can be not just a scaffold, but sometimes can also just add to the burden, because we do notice that there are kids that are making strides. And so something that we even talked about is knowing that the text is going to come back up, that even though we've put in these scaffolds in place and we've maybe added a quick jot or something like that, there are still kids that are needing some more support, and that this text is so important. It comes back up again and again, and knowing that that's happening, you can still see kids making strides to do better, because it's not going to go away. So that's pretty encouraging too, because it allows them to see this is important. It's worth digging in, and you're going to see it multiple times. So they kind of start to pick up on that. But again, that I just wanted to add that, because we had a really great conversation about kids that were making strides that you don't typically see, and that there's always that worry that you have when you leave. You've put these scaffolds in place, and yet there needs to be more. And the good news is there is.
Yep. It's a great point about the importance of, for our kids getting multiple at bats, right? We're not just giving them that one shot, but multiple opportunities. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for engaging in that thoughtful reflection on your homework. Before we dig in a bit more into scaffolding, I just wanted to ground the conversation we're having today around scaffolding in this bigger picture of what we want to see in a literacy classroom. And so I wanted to zoom in into the instructional practice guide and look specifically at correction 2. I know you guys looked at a little bit at this in your January session as well. But I wanted to look here at correction 2 and think about, how do you see scaffolding? How does scaffolding support us in achieving our vision for excellent literacy instruction? So when you look, I'm going to give you a minute here to read correction 2 again. And as you read it, I want you to think about, how would scaffolding help me to accomplish this with my students? Even though scaffolding isn't specifically called out in this core action, how would scaffolding help you to get to this vision of literacy instruction here? And just type your responses into the chat box. So I'll give us 2 minutes here to read, think, and write, and then we'll come back together. Okay, so Christy called out that scaffolding gives students access to the complex text. Great. Lincoln Heights called out making sure that students develop a basic understanding of the text so that they can then dig deeper. It gives them access to those more challenging questions about the text. Great. So a lot of you are pointing to that, a point that we've been talking about, even as we've been talking about text-dependent questions, which is really thinking about, how do those questions and our scaffolds give students access to those complex texts? I'll just name that I think and I think this is coming up in a lot of y'all's responses, that, looking closely at details from the text, looking closely at words and phrases in the text, looking closely at my sequence of questions, those are scaffolds that we're giving our students. When we think about the idea that a scaffold is there as a support to give students access to this challenging or complex text. And so in many ways, doing these components of core action 2 are an entry point for our students to be able to give them access and support to a text that they might struggle to read independently, but we can use these questions to drive our support for them. So I want to think a little bit about what this looks like in our classrooms. And I'm going to do this by starting here with a scenario. And I want you to put yourself in this teacher's shoes. And I will just say, I've been in this teacher's shoes before. I've been this teacher before. So it comes from a place of great empathy for myself. But let's think about the scenario a bit. So a teacher is asking her 8th grade students for an example of dramatic irony in Romeo and Juliet, a very juicy topic for discussion. And the classroom is quiet. Been there. There's blank stares. And so the teacher jumps in. Can you all remember that the moment when Romeo kills himself? And the students all nod. And what does the audience know that Romeo doesn't know? The teacher continues. we know that Juliet is only sleeping. That's an example of dramatic irony, right? Do you agree? Lots of head nodding from the students. So I want you to put yourself in this teacher's position, and why do you think that he or she approaches student confusion in this way? What might this teacher have done differently in this situation? And you can type your responses into the chat box. I love that line. Derek. She wants to help them not sink. Teacher. The teacher's not comfortable with allowing students to struggle. She's trying to save them. Not allowing too much think time. Okay, great. So I will say that I wanted to start with a scenario. One, because I think that we've all been in this position before, right? Where there's a bunch of blank stares in the classroom and it can be a real moment of panic. But also to say that, I think a teacher in the scenario, as you all noted, I think can come from very positive and kind aspirations, right? Of not wanting to see the student struggle. And also it's our jobs for students to succeed, right? That's why we became teachers. We want to see students learn and grow. And it can be hard in that moment to see students struggle. And so I want to name that this teacher, I think, can come from a very positive aspirations for her students. Let's look at another example of a different teacher doing many of the things you all suggested in the chat box here. So same scenario, different approach. A teacher is asking her 8th grade students for an example of dramatic irony in Romeo and Juliet. The classroom is quiet, blank stares. Again, been there. And the teacher jumps in. Remember that dramatic irony is when the reader has a very different perception of the situation than the character. Turn and talk to your partner about an example of dramatic irony from the play. Teacher gives 3 minutes for students to discuss and then asks for a few students to share out responses. Mario responds, "When Juliet's sleeping, Romeo thinks she's dead. It's dramatic irony because we, the audience, know that she's still alive." So this teacher in this scenario did a lot of the things that you all suggested in the chat box on the previous slide of some strategies. This teacher, instead of, sort of giving those spoon feeding the student the answer here, reminded them of the definition of dramatic irony, gave them some time to talk with a partner. So they had some processing time and time to hear a peer's thinking. And then eventually in sharing out, a student shared the correct response here. My question for you all is, what resources or support or planning does this teacher need to be able to provide these types of supports in the moment? And you can type your responses into the chat box. Oh, good. Leanne called out considering student grouping for discussion. Lindsay, thank you for calling out a positive learning environment, how important that classroom culture of learning is to build that environment for students to be able to build on each other's thinking and take risks like that. Lots of people calling out needing to anticipate the correct response and possible misconceptions so that they're ready in the moment, which I think is all very, very true. And we'll spend a lot of time in today's session because I think one of the big takeaways from this scenario is the role that preparation and planning plays in this, right? if I, in the moment, students are struggling and I haven't thought through, okay, what is my plan B, C, and D? When students are struggling, it can be very hard in the moment to pull that off. And so really trying to use our planning and preparation time so that we're ready for those moments when our students need us to push them even more. Okay, we're going to watch a quick video. I had to stop sharing my screen here so I can share this video with you. And I'll just name that this video, I want you to watch this for examples of how this teacher is scaffolding learning for her students, but I'll name this isn't like an overtly, this isn't going to hit you over the head with scaffolding examples. You need to kind of look for it closely. But I want you to pay attention to what might this teacher be doing that supports students and gives them that extra scaffold in a text-based discussion. So let me just. Okay, hold on.
He pushes the illness, blows them off track, and then they go to bonus learn.
My goal is to make them independent learners.
Are you confident in that answer? Well, there's two parts. Well, is it after the cave one, or is it after
Look at your chart. What you saw today in the learning stations is my way of trying to promote independent learning, where I can back off and provide more of a facilitator role and go around and basically help fix up any struggles with comprehension or questions. Well, is it teaching us about how she doesn't have to be mortal or be a human, right? Could it be teaching us about how we should act as humans? Yes. But at this point, they can try to utilize some of the tools that I'm giving them without direct access to me or help from me. That's great.
Homer wrote
he wrote the Iliad. That too.
When they walk in, they need to know that it's not only my classroom but theirs, that they feel safe when they come in and they are willing to take risks.
How did he display leadership in the novel so far? Is that okay? Well,
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Learner-centered to me just means that I'm focusing on my students at that time, the students that I have right now. So I may not teach everything the same year to year, the same concepts are addressed, but the students are the most important, how they learn, the learning styles, what it's going to take to bring all of the pieces, the components of language arts with the reading, the writing, the speaking, all those parts to the whole concept, the big picture for each unit that needs to be presented to them. What you're going to do is you're going to take the 4 parts of a myth, which are on here if you get stuck, but now you got to find examples of where human behavior is shown in this myth or where supernatural elements might occur in this myth. So I really need to think about day to day, week to week, unit to unit. How am I going to move forward? And I'm constantly reevaluating, are my lessons working? Are they doing some good thinking? What can I help to scaffold and bump them up to the next level versus do I need to slow down? What skills do I need to revisit? So it's really based on them. They're teaching me how they need to be taught. Look at your consequences from your chart.
They lost 18 men. They had to throw
How did they lose 18 men? Let's go through.
The Sicilians killed them.
Okay. I think that I definitely take into account the neuroscience behind learning. When I approach lessons, I like to break things down. I like to piece it out, parts to whole. And there's a lot of research behind that, patterning of the brain, making sure that I'm keeping in mind that each mind is unique and different, and my approach might have to be revisited every once in a while to make sure I'm matching what the students need.
Okay, well, I share my screen again here. I'll give you just a second to think about what examples of scaffolding did you see in that teacher's classroom, and how do they benefit students? Okay, so I would love to hear from some people. If you would, you can type this in the chat box, but I would love for a few people to unmute yourselves and share. So what examples did you see of scaffolding in this from this teacher? And how does this teacher balance student independence with scaffolding?
Okay, small group instruction. Maybe it's ability group, which should, scaffold even further.
Okay, great. So we saw a lot of small group work there. Great.
She had a graphic organizer to help them develop and organize their thoughts. I thought that was a great way to help them, to support them.
Yep. She had this, as it seems like it was a graphic organizer around the parts of a myth. And she said, you can use this if you need it, right? So it was accessible to students who might want it or need it.
I think some of it had to do with her questioning. She knew where she wanted them to go, and she knew what kind of questions to ask them without giving them the answer to get them to that point.
Yep, excellent. I completely agree. And there was a couple of moments where it was a good example of sort of breaking down questions without it being like a spoon feeding example there. Great. Brooke called out sort of the way she asked students to return to their own writing and using that as a scaffold themselves as a support. So the thinking they'd already done. Great. And yes, I couldn't agree more with this point about climate and the culture of learning and how crucial that is, right? Because in order for our students to really take advantage of the scaffolds and opportunities that we're giving them, they have to be willing to take those risks. And especially when we think about a middle school classroom, that can be really challenging, right? And so the importance of having that really strong culture for students to take risks in front of their peers is really important. Can't emphasize that enough. Yep, agree with teacher-student relationships. Okay, great. Well, let's keep that vision in mind as we start to dig into some concrete strategies around scaffolding. And I want to give you all a chance to, I've put together some specific strategies, like a cheat sheet, a toolbox of scaffolding strategies we might use every day in our lessons. This is in your handouts as well. I want you to read through these strategies. The handouts also has an example and a non-example, and just read through and annotate. So put a plus sign next to any ideas that you want to try. Put a star next to ideas that you already tried, but you want to use more regularly, and put a question mark next to any strategies that you have questions or wonderings about. So I'll give everybody 3 minutes here to just read through and annotate, and then we'll come back and discuss some of these strategies. Okay, great. Let's come back together. And I want to ask everyone to pick one of the strategies that you either want to try or you want to use more regularly in your classroom, and just put that into the chat box so we can get a sense of where people want to focus some of their scaffolding work. And I'm going to talk through a few of these. I'll just highlight, and I hope that the example, non-example chart communicates this as well, that all of these things are tools, they're strategies, but they're about how we use them, right? Any of these can be used to over scaffold, or any of these can be used, right, not effectively, and they won't really help students in the classroom. So all these strategies are about how we use them with our strong teacher expertise. And any of the strategies that our instructional materials give us, I think are a big piece of that. I would emphasize with multiple readings, and I hope the example, not example, demonstrated this well, the importance of doing this with a lens or a focus. We're not just rereading for the sake of rereading, but we're giving students, a new lens to focus on in that rereading, or we're rereading a particular passage with a new question in mind, to really support students. Thinking about paired text, right? How can additional text help build students' knowledge in a topic so that they're better able to access or understand another text you're reading in your classroom? It isn't about replacing that grade level or complex text, but it's really thinking about how could we read an additional text to help build students' understanding and background knowledge in that topic. I see lots of people writing about think or write time. I think this is, as I mentioned earlier, I love a quick write. I think it's one of the most high leverage things you can use frequently and easily in your classroom that doesn't require extra preparation time, but really increases that student ownership in the classroom. So good to see that. Great. I see a lot of people identifying no opt-out as a strategy they want to incorporate. And I think this is one that's really important to pair with a good, strong culture of learning. We don't want students to feel like I'm coming back to you just because you're in trouble because you didn't get it right, but I'm coming back to you because I'm that invested in making sure you really understand. And I think that's the sort of culture piece you want to have paired with that one. Great. I think graphic organizer, I think that video we just watched of that teacher was a really strong example of graphic organizers as a strong scaffold. I think sometimes we just sort of throw graphic it's like our go-to scaffold, right? But that teacher had a really good example of using a graphic organizer with purpose. It had been a place where they had documented their learning previously, and then going into a new task, they were able to take that and use that to help organize their thinking. And so that was a really good example of doing that. Great. Any questions or reflections on these? We're going to use these more in a moment, but just wanted to talk through them a little bit before we did that. It's exciting to see in the chat box so many people committing to new things they want to use more regularly. Okay, so let's look at an example from our materials now. This is an example from Amplify ELA from a 7th grade lesson. Amplify gives you a strong representation of differentiation in all of their lessons, which is absolutely excellent. And there's really good scaffolding strategies in there to pull out and use with your students. And so I wanted to call some of that out as well, that our materials have in them. My perspective does the same thing in terms of, when you go to your questions and tasks, it gives really strong differentiation examples and scaffolding strategies. But I wanted to look at some examples of the way that our materials provide this and what some of the thinking that we'd have to do to prepare to use them. So let's look at this differentiation example from Amplify ELA. This is in your handouts as well, so you can look more closely at it there. I want you to read through this and think about how would these differentiation strategies support students in reaching the lesson objective. And I put the lesson focus standards at the bottom of this slide. Which strategies would you prioritize? when you think about applying something like this in your own classroom? And what would you need to do in advance in your preparation to be able to implement these? So I'm going to give everybody just some solo think and write time here. You can jot this down in your handouts, on a piece of paper next to you, wherever is most comfortable for you, but jot down your responses to those questions.
Jetta, for our non-ELA folks, can you give a quick definition of what they're seeing in terms of those different shapes? Like where you see like core, substantial. I mean, I think it's a little obvious, but just in case somebody's like, what does that mean? Or how do I interpret this?
Yes, definitely. So this is sort of tiers of support that it's calling out here. So in terms of core instruction for the whole group, this might be a level of support that I would give. The substantial is an increased level of support that I might give to students who need even more support. And then it gives specific ELL supports for our English language learners. Thank you for naming that, Bethany. So I'd be curious to hear as you guys reflect on this example, and you can put yourselves off mute or type this into the chat box, but specifically that last question, what do you think you might need in terms to be able to prepare to implement some of these things in your own classroom? What would you have to do in advance?
It makes me think of what we used to call assessing and advancing type questions in, 10 ready support. What is assessing? What are we assessing here? What are we looking or scanning student work for? And if we see what we're looking for, where are we leading them to? And kind of knowing those destinations for ourselves, I guess, is one thing I was thinking about.
Yep. So in terms of how I might prepare to do that in the lesson, Sarah, I would just add that really thinking about, okay, at what point during the lesson am I going to be circulating and reading student writing, for example, so that in the moment I'm, doing that assessment piece that you're talking about. Great. Anyone else, when you think about what you might need to do in advance to be able to implement some of these things?
I'm looking in particular at, this is actually one of my favorite differentiation things on Amplify is where when there's a more challenging prompt, it's actually broken into like building questions that prepare the student to answer like the bigger questions, but by breaking it down into like little bites, right? So I think in order to do that, you need to be familiar with the writing response that you're expecting, be really familiar with the aspects of the text that a student, sorry, my dog is scratching and it's very jingly, so ADD. So you would need to be familiar with the text and like understand the aspects of the text that they need to understand and pull out in order to answer the prompt, break those down into smaller questions, anticipate the struggle, and then create those smaller prompt questions.
Elliot, I'm not going to say anything else. You just said it all for me. That was exactly what I would have said. So it was great. I want to emphasize you called out there having the exemplar response in mind. So really knowing where you wanted students to get is a really important part of that, so that you can then anticipate some of the misconceptions they can have. Great.
Jetta, I like that it calls out that as the teacher, we need to plan to group students within the same differentiation level together. So if maybe I know my students aren't seated that way, how might I get them organized in that way? For one, you know, it makes it a little easier for me as a teacher if I'm with a group of students who have similar needs and I can possibly provide that need holistically to the group at one time if needed, but also just how they might be able to support each other, knowing what their different needs might be within the group, because they're not all exactly the same.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that that calls attention to there's some of these decisions I'm going to have to make in the moment in the classroom as I'm circulating and seeing what students are doing. But then there's some things like that that I might make it advanced based on student performance and how they're doing in my classroom.
Well, and that's what I think too, when we think about exemplar, it's like familiarizing yourself with an exemplar can seem like a lot, but you're really looking for those pieces of text evidence that for you as a teacher, you can go back to and redirect kids back to. And that makes it more almost like chunking it out like we do for kids, but for ourselves, like this exemplar text is using this evidence. And so this is probably an important part of the text I need to pay attention to.
Yep, great. Okay, so we are going to do some practice now. So I'm going to give you a scenario and I'm going to ask you to actually plan out with this is a limited scenario. So you're going to have to make some like leaps of faith with me here and assume some things, but I'll give you a scenario and I'm going to ask you to plan out, okay, so what are some scaffolds you might use in the moment with this student? And then we're going to send you into breakout rooms with a partner to actually practice your scaffolding strategies. So just to give you a heads up, you're going to put these to use in a role play practice here in a moment. Okay, so the scenario is you are teaching a 7th grade lesson on the telltale heart. It's always such a hard title to say, but you're teaching a lesson on the telltale heart. Students are doing an activity where they have to reorganize a storyboard and you have to place an image of the beating heart on the storyboard. You are looking for them to place the beating heart into the narrator's thought bubble. And for those of you who have read The Telltale Heart recently or remember it from your middle school days, the reason you want the students putting the beating heart in the narrator's thought bubble is to demonstrate that they understand that only the narrator can hear the beating heart and that the police detectives cannot hear the beating heart, even though he thinks that they can. So that is what you are looking for as you circulate around the room. You notice that one student has placed the beating heart in the room and not in the narrator's thought bubble. So what do you do? I am going to give you a little think time here. As I said, this is just a brief scenario. So you're going to have to take a leap of faith here, make some assumptions about what's happening in this classroom. But I want you to think about, I'm circulating, I see this student hasn't put the heart in the thought bubble. What scaffolds could I provide to this student as a support? You can go back right now and look at that scaffold strategy sheet that we looked at a moment ago and identify one of those you want to use in the role play. I'm going to give you a little bit of think time and some time to script out what you'd want to do, and then we will break into partners to actually try this out. So I'm going to give everybody about 5 minutes here of think time. Okay, I see in the chat box people are already getting some ideas of what you're going to do here. Okay, so let me explain what you'll do for the role play practice. Oops. So when you go into your breakout room with your partner here in just a second, you should have one partner be partner A, one partner will be partner B. Partner A, you'll be the teacher first, and partner B will be the student. You'll role play the scenario a bit, try out your scaffolding strategy. Partner A gives you feedback, and then you switch. Partner B gets to be the teacher, partner A is the student. Role play it out, get some feedback, and then we'll be done. I'm going to give you guys 8 minutes in your breakout room, so it's about four minutes each. So just so you're keeping time there. And let me just...
Got caught off mid-sentence. No. Anybody else?
That always happens. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some good practice and discussion of strategies in your breakout rooms. I want to highlight now, some of you guys who are Amplify ELA teachers may have already recognized this lesson, but this is from a 7th grade Amplify ELA lesson. And I wanted to highlight that some of the scaffolding strategies specifically for this lesson and this task that Amplify recommends. So I wanted to give you a second and just read on the slide here what they're recommending as some scaffolding strategies, and think about what would you want to change about your scaffolding now that you've gotten some feedback on the role play you did and seen what the materials recommend. So take a second and read that, and then think about your response to that question. You can type in the chat box. So you can go ahead and type in the chat box anything you would add, any takeaways you had from feedback from your partner or something your partner did, or seeing this exemplar from the materials, anything you would add or change to your scaffolding if you'll type it in the chat box. Yep. So I see Lincoln Heights, Alicia, you guys both calling out sort of redirecting students back to the text-defined evidence. What I really like about these suggestions from the Amplify lesson is it sort of gives you the questions to ask if you do that and the student either has sort of the incorrect text evidence or isn't able to pull up text evidence to support their answer. Like, then what do you do? And these are some really strong sort of break it down questions that you could use to then follow up with that student. So I think this is a really nice example for us of where our materials have a lot of supports built into them. And it's really about how do we pull those out and utilize them with our students. Great. Okay. Whoops. Okay, so you're going to have some time now to think about implementing some of these strategies in your own classrooms. We asked you for today's session to bring with you a lesson, an upcoming lesson that you're planning to implement. And we're going to read through this lesson with a specific lens of scaffolding and how we're providing scaffolding to our students. So I want you to read through the lesson, and your first step will be to annotate. So highlight any differentiation or scaffolding supports already suggested by your materials, and include some notes for yourself on how you might apply these to your particular students or classroom. And then, and there's a chart in your handouts for you guys to take notes here on this. What I'd like you to do is identify and underline 2 or 3 lesson questions or tasks or writing prompts where you're going to want to provide some potential scaffolding to students. And then think about what scaffolding do your materials already recommend, if any, what additional supports might you provide without taking away the rigor of your materials, and which students will need these additional supports. So you'll have about 20 minutes in your groups to do this, and we'll be in curriculum specific groups. You'll be with people who also use your same materials, and our coaches will be divided in our groups as well to help support facilitation of that. But everybody should leave our breakout room with a clear plan of a few questions or tasks for an upcoming lesson they want to focus on, and some scaffolds that they plan to use. Questions before we go to our breakout rooms? Oh.
Jada, I have a question.
Yes, please.
As participants are going into their respective breakout rooms, do they need just a few minutes on their own, just some think time in order to complete some of this before they're able to like discuss it?
Sure. And if I would say in the first few minutes of your breakout room, you guys can do that. You just take that time in your breakout room to do that. Yeah, I was just about to say, I assume that every group was like mine, where we got cut off in the heat of a juicy conversation. So sorry about that. It's inevitable in these, but hope that you got some really thoughtful collaboration with your colleagues, have some clear, concrete next steps for implementing some of these scaffolds in your next lesson, and hopefully had some laughs at the end of a long day. That's also very important. So, okay, let me just share my screen again here to wrap us up. Okay, so your homework, leaving today's session. So implement the lesson that you just talked through and planned with your colleagues, and then reflect on your implementation. So what did you notice about the impact of these scaffolds on student learning, and what would you do differently next time to support, to better support student learning? And when we come to our April reflection call, we will come back to those reflections. So make sure you've documented and recorded those, because a lot of things can happen between when you do them and when you come to the reflection call. So I would jot down some notes for yourself, and then collect 5 samples of student work from the lesson you plan today, and submit that to the student work folder, just like you did this past month. And then reflect on what you noticed about student learning and how the scaffolds supported students. And then we will review some student learning in our call in April. For leaders, we have similar aligned homework here. So observe 2 literacy lessons What types of scaffoldings were in action in the lesson? What did you notice about the impact of scaffolding on student learning? And then for the same as teachers, collecting those 5 samples of student work and submitting them in your Google folders. And then we will reflect on those at our April reflection call. Bethany, did I miss anything there?
Nope.
Okay.
Up next, we have a learning reflection call. Now in February, we did those team specific, but this next time we're going to be whole group, and we'll utilize some breakout rooms to either group by materials or group by grade or group by role. So this next session will be one big group, kind of like we are today, instead of individual team sessions. But just know that we'll do a variety of breakout rooms depending on kind of where we want to lean into the reflection aspect of the work. So that's April 14th. It's already on our Strong Start Network calendar. I don't yet have a Zoom link dropped in that calendar invite yet, but as we get closer, I'll drop that in there. So you'll be able to access the Zoom for that meeting off our Strong Start Network calendar. And of course, we'll send some reminders like we usually do. And then just some other upcoming dates. Of course, May 5th, we'll be back whole group for some deeper learning. And so that's a 2-hour session just like today. Then more to come about the summer, but just generally speaking, hold these dates. We'll do a semester reflection. And at this point, we're kind of brainstorming some team share outs. You know, as you reflect on kind of what your team's been up to this first learning cycle, or some kind of aha moments or some examples of some of your learning in action. We may do some team share outs, may do a little bit of a text study, something of that nature. So we've got some things floating around. And then we would love to, hopefully, if we're able, again, this is still really up in the air, but do some type of 2-day kind of retreat or day and a half, something like that, maybe in July. But all of that, we'll know more just as the next couple months unfold, especially everything regarding COVID-19. But we'll keep you in the loop and try to give you as much heads up as possible.
I want to meet you all in person so badly.
Me too. I want to meet you. Everybody wants to meet in person.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. I cannot stress enough how much I appreciate all the thoughtful conversation. I know it is at the end of a very long day. So appreciate so much the professional learning and all the insightful ideas you guys brought to today. And it was a pleasure spending an afternoon with you guys. And I will see you all soon.
Bye, everybody. Have a good one.
Hey, Jetta, if you don't care, I was just going to stick around because you've left me in suspense.
I so appreciate you doing that. Okay, here's what I was going to say. This is like, we got cut off in our breakout room. I was going to say the question that you raised about rewriting from the perspective that was in that lesson, I feel like ties really nicely to that later writing task, because they have to put themselves, it's rewriting the paragraph from the perspective of Uncle Marcos, right?
Yeah.
So they have to understand, they have to do some character analysis of who he is as a person, which then will like lead them to that being able to answer that writing task later. So I was just going to make that connection, that little activity will set them up for that really well. So I would try and like, you know, review what students write there and really assess like who's really understanding Uncle Marcos, who's confused, like who do I want to follow up with, so that they're better prepared for that writing task later on. That's all.
All right, perfect. Is there a thing called like a Wordle? You know, is that what it is? You know, that you could make about? Okay.
Word cloud kind of thing.
Yeah, word cloud. Okay. That, I just thought that would be kind of a cool idea if you put in words just about who he is. Okay, that came to me.
I love that. Anyway, you're like documenting who he is as a character along the way, will set them up well for that.
Nice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You guys have a good evening.
You too.
See ya.
Guys, I'm going to hang on just a minute with Leanne and Tamara and Betty. But the rest, everybody can hop off. Jetta, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Let me stop my share.